Yeshua HaNotzri, the first century Jewish rabbi whom we call Jesus of Nazareth, taught a halakha, a way of following Torah, that centered loving God and loving one's neighbor as oneself. We Christians lose our way whenever we abandon the socially prophetic teachings of Jesus and embrace the worst aspects of American culture. Not Jesus first, but America first. Not the universal siblinghood of all humankind, but the poisonous bonds of white supremacy, government of, by, and for the very wealthy, and the scapegoating of the poor, the uninsured, immigrants, and so many others. On Independence Day, the president signed into law his so-called Big, Beautiful Bill. This bill lowers taxes for the wealthiest Americans by robbing money for the most vulnerable Americans, enacting the largest cuts in the safety net in decades. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the bill will leave 12 million people without health insurance in the next 10 years. A recent analysis in the Annals of Internal Medicine estimates that the proposed Medicaid cuts could lead to more than 16,000 preventable deaths annually. Many Medicaid-dependent rural hospitals will close, leaving people in those areas without health care. The bill also increases spending for border security and immigration enforcement, so more people will be deported to lands other than the one that they came from. In the wake of Senate passage of the bill, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who styles himself an evangelical Christian, pointed upward using the common evangelical signal for "Give God the credit." Later that day, Speaker Johnson posted a Bible verse on his social media from the second letter to the Corinthians that read, "All this is from God," adding "Soli Deo Gloria," which is Latin for glory to God alone. Anyone who claims to be Christian while celebrating cruelty has abandoned the halakha of Jesus and embraced another way. The distortion of the halakha of Jesus afoot in America today embraces white supremacy, Christian nationalism, racism, misogyny, xenophobia, and the abuse of the poor. Politicians who embrace this misanthropic Christianity encourage us to view the poor and immigrants as somehow other, as alien, as lesser than ourselves. If we think of those people as other, they can be oppressed, exploited, deported, confined, hurt, or denied justice. They can be seen as beyond the bounds of having any bond with us or any claim upon us. This brings us to the parable of the Good Samaritan. I don't know about you, but when I first learned about the parable of the Good Samaritan, I was told that it generally meant that we should be kind to others and help those in need. Well, if you listen to the parable the way a first century Jew would listen to the parable, there's a deeper message. Yeshua HaNotzri, Jesus of Nazareth, was a first century Jew. So were all of his first followers, and so were the first hearers of this parable. The lawyer who tests Jesus is not a lawyer like an American lawyer. As a lawyer, I'm always thankful for that, but rather an expert in the Torah, an expert in the law of Moses. He wants to know who he can separate himself from in order to safely deny justice to them, because they are beyond the bounds of having any bond with him or claim upon him. Like Jesus, his fellow Jew, the lawyer knows that in order to keep the covenant with God, he has to love God and has to love his neighbor as himself. No tradition is monolithic. Judaism is not monolithic. Christianity is not monolithic. There are misanthropic, exclusionary Jewish texts, just as there are misanthropic, exclusionary Christian texts. Misanthropic Jewish texts would have told the Torah scholar that he could safely exclude non-Jews from his definition of neighbor. But other Jewish scriptures, like Leviticus chapter 19, 33 through 34, and 25, 47, say that Jews must love as themselves their fellow Jews, anyone who dwells nearby, strangers, sojourners, and resident aliens. All of these people who Jews might be tempted to see as other are to be treated as neighbors. So the answer that Jesus gives in telling the parable of the Good Samaritan is a very Jewish one. On the narrow, steep, and dangerous road to Jericho, a priest and a Levite see a half-dead man who has been stripped, beaten, and robbed. Rather than stopping to help him, they pass by on the other side. As Amy Jill Levine, who gave our Mark lecture in the spring, has written, Jews then and now trace their ancestry to one of three groups. They are either the descendants of priests, or Levites, or common Israelites. The mentioning of the priest and the Levite would have told the hearers of the parable, they would have anticipated that if there was a hero in the story, the third person would be a common Israelite like them. But Jesus turns their expectations upside down. The hero of the parable is, in fact, a Samaritan. Who are the Samaritans? The Samaritans dwelled in the central hill country of what is now Israel today, and they were viewed by Jews as aliens, and in fact, as enemies, although Jews and Samaritans shared much in common. Samaritans would have told you that they were the descendants of the northern tribes of Benjamin, of Ephraim and Manasseh. But Jews viewed them as the product of intermarriage with foreigners brought into Samaria when Assyria conquered the northern kingdom in 722 BCE. Jews believed that Samaritans were either descendants of those foreigners or the product of mixed marriages with those foreigners. They were therefore other. They were not real Jews. Virgilio Elizondo, a modern-day Hispanic scholar, basically says that Samaritans were the Mexican, Latino people of their day. That's why Jews felt that they could exclude them. So again, Jews not only exclude Samaritans, they consider Samaritans to be enemies because they are related to people who once conquered the northern kingdom. Judeans claim that Samaritans were not Jewish, but were in fact the descendants of Cuthians, people from Babylonia imported by the Assyrians into the central hill country. So the strained relations have to do with genealogy, history, ethnicity, and ethnic purity. Jews hated Samaritans so much that in about 110 BCE, the Maccabean leader, John Hyrcanus, destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim to prove to Samaritans that there was only one place where God should be worshipped, and that place was the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. It would have been hard for first century Jews to absorb what Jesus told them in telling the parable. It would have been hard for them to think of a Samaritan as the hero. But the message that Jesus delivered to them that day is that you should help those who you consider different from you, even enemies, and you might receive compassion from those same people, from those enemies. Amy Jill Levine and another Jewish New Testament scholar, David Flusser, both contend that Jesus is probably the only rabbi who counseled Jews to love even their enemies. Amy Jill Levine goes so far as to say that Jesus may have been the first person in Western history to counsel love of enemies. So when we think about those who we are scapegoating as other today because of nationality, religion, politics, skin color, gender preference, economic status, or anything else, we should remember that when we discriminate against those people or harm them, we are not following the teachings of Jesus. To quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor martyred by the Nazis, the church is only the church when it exists for others. And when we see those who have been abused because of prejudice, we should not just bandage their wounds, but we should drive a spoke into the wheel of injustice itself. So when you see people in our society being hurt by another way, you should stop on the road to help them. Have compassion, and you will live.